Warfare Introduction. Science, geophysical warfare, chemtrails, environmental modification. You can go to archive.org or at a time. Others you can listen to in their entirety without checking out. There are some reports, for example, that some countries have been trying to construct something like an Ebola virus, and that would be a very dangerous phenomenon to say the least. Alvin Toffler has written about this in terms of some scientists in their laboratories trying to devise certain types of pathogens that would be ethnic specific so that they could just eliminate certain ethnic groups and races. And others are designing some sort of engineering, some sort of insects that can destroy specific crops. Others are engaging of terrorism, whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, the use of electromagnetic waves. So there are plenty of ingenious minds out there that are at work finding ways in which they can wreak terror upon other nations. It's real, and that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts. William S. Cohen, U.S. Secretary of Defense, 1997. William S. Cohen, while he served at the United States Secretary of Defense. It is from his keynote address to the Conference on Terrorism, Weapons of Mass Destruction, and U.S. Strategy given on 28th of April 1997 at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. It can therefore be taken as an official position of the United States government, at least at that time. Brzezinski, a Polish-American political scientist, geostrategist, and statesman who served as United States National Security Advisor to President Jimmy Carter from 1977 to 1981, wrote in his book, Between Two Ages, in 1970, "It is ironic to recall that in 1878, Friedrich Engels, commenting on the Franco-Prussian War, proclaimed that weapons used have reached such a stage of perfection that further progress, which would have any revolutionizing, is no longer possible. Not only have new weapons been developed, but some of the basic concepts of geography and strategy have been fundamentally altered. Space and weather control have replaced Suez or Gibraltar as key elements of strategy." After events like the Christmas 2004 Asian tsunami and 2005's record-shattering Atlantic hurricane season, many people have wondered just how natural those natural disasters were. Could terrorists or rogue states have been involved? Is it really possible to alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves? Has weather control really become a key element of national strategy? While the use of electromagnetic waves, radio frequency weapons, is exceedingly difficult to prove, there indeed are many out there both on the drawing board and in the arsenal. Secretary Cohen wasn't just making them up as a ploy to get increased funding for counterterrorism efforts. He knew about them, and so should we. Science beyond the box. Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Mark Twain, Samuel Longhorn Clemens, 1835 to 1910, was credited with saying that in an editorial by Charles D. Warner Dudley in the Hartford Courant of Hartford, Connecticut in 1897, as we will see in the next chapter, it wasn't entirely true then, and it is far less true today. This is a fine example of the limits of conventional wisdom. There certainly are many readily discernible civilian projects intended to do something about the weather today. These are taking place around the world as you read this. In the United States, they include cloud seeding to increase the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California and hail suppression over farmland on the Great Plains, to name but two. We will briefly examine the positive and negative sides of civilian weather modification in this book, which may be just the off-the-shelf versions of military technologies. Better than 80% of what I will present to you in this book is well-established and fully cited mainstream science. But mainstream science has self-imposed blinders. Science and the base of knowledge it is founded upon resists change. There are many reasons for this. One is that science and individual scientists must admit fallibility, something that most people of education are reluctant to do. Who wants to admit they were wrong? How much harder would it be to admit you're wrong if advancing your career depended on your being right? Also, grant money does not go to mavericks. The institutionalized resistance to new theories has resulted in it routinely taking from 50 to 100 years for new discoveries to move from ridiculed nonsense to revered facts. I bet you can think of several examples of this lag between the time a theory is presented and its universal acceptance. You may remember this one. Alfred Wegener, a German geophysicist and meteorologist, proposed the theory of continental drift in his book, The Origins of the Continents and the Oceans, published in German in 1915. For nearly 50 years, his theory was ridiculed, yet today it is taught in nearly every school as the science of plate tectonics. Today, many branches of mainstream science have circled the wagons, waging war with cranks with goofy theories, some of which, like Alfred Wegener's, will eventually be proven correct. One such example is American archaeologists and anthropologists and scores of revisionist researchers whose work collectively demonstrates that the Americas were reached many different times and in many different by many more peoples than just a few Chinese crossing the Bering Strait land bridge 12,000 years ago. Another example is the assault on traditional Egyptology of independent investigators, while West and Scotch, whose research pushed back thousands of years, and Hancock and Bauval, who found a connection between the positions of the Giza pyramids and the constellation of Orion, have received the greater notoriety. The most spectacular work has been done by Christopher Dunn, a master craftsman and engineer. Dunn has virtually proven that the wisdom of the ancients, having used copper chisels and stone pounders to build the great monuments of Egypt, is ludicrously wrong. Work clearly shows that the ancients used advanced machining techniques, especially high-speed lathes. Further, he has presented virtually irrefutable evidence that the Great Pyramid was not a burial chamber, but the largest machine ever built. So far, the mainstream's only answer to him has been to ignore his work. Similarly, understanding weather warfare will take us outside the box of conventional wisdom. Why is the weatherman so often wrong? Meteorology isn't a complete science. Many things about the atmosphere and its interactions with other geophysical systems, like the oceans and the Earth's magnetic field, are still not fully understood. Meteorology, like all mainstream sciences, refuses to look at crank theories raised outside its circle. This includes anything that smacks of astrology. Unfortunately, this smugly arrogant stance has blinded meteorologists to important facts. The single greatest influence on the Earth's weather is the sun. It is an accepted that eruptions from sunspots affect the weather. The sun's sunspot cycle seems to be affected by a number of factors. including the position of planets because of their proximity, and Saturn and Jupiter because of their size. The sun's magnetic field is as large as the solar system and is affected by everything within it. Solar system is just that, a system in which all pieces are interconnected. Understanding these relationships better should lead to improved forecasting, except it won't happen anytime soon, as meteorologists clap their hands over their ears and chant, "I can't hear you," when you bring this up. Temperatures across North America in January 2006 were record-setting. Temperatures natural or artificial? If man-made, were they inadvertent or eco-terrorist attack? Considering the topic of this book, you might expect me to say that we were under attack. But I'm going to offer an even more outlandish theory. These temps were perfectly natural and would have been predicted if only meteorology didn't have inversion. A crank theory that has been repeatedly championed in the popular press for the last few decades is the so-called Jupiter effect. This is the observation that some astronomical events have an effect on the Earth. Retired forester and firefighter Roger L. Jewell spent a lifetime trying to discover if there was anything to the old adage about there being fire weather, and if severe wildfires were the result of weather cycles. In his groundbreaking book, Riding the Wild Orb, Long-Term Weather Extremes on the Planet, he outlines his discovery that there are indeed weather cycles caused by planetary mechanics, and not just the four seasons Stream will admit to. One of the things he discovered was that North America has a January thaw, like the one we saw in 2006, every 8 years, like clockwork. This last one was the hottest because of other additional factors in play, like global warming. His discovery was that a January thaw happens every time the planet Venus comes between the Earth and the Sun around the time of the winter solstice. In astrology, this is called conjunction, and in meteorology, it is called a crank theory because it sounds too much like astrology for these learned men to deal with. It is anyone's guess how much else the mainstream is responding to by squeezing its eyes shut. I mentioned this and that this book is about human manipulation of natural forces to produce unnatural events. But how do you determine what's natural and what isn't? This is a difficult and delicate subject. As we will discuss later, Mother Nature gives great plausible deniability. One of the enticements of geophysical warfare is being able to hide it behind Mother Nature's skirts. One needs a baseline of what is unquestionably natural to be able to say definitively that so-and-so is unnatural. And thanks in part to the half-built nature of modern geosciences, we really don't have that. This means that in this book I'm going to have to tell you what is established and accepted by mainstream science, and then take you outside of the box. Rest assured, I will always try to tell you when we cross the line from accepted to crank. Secretary Cohen's concerns about using electromagnetic waves to alter the climate and/or set off earthquakes or volcanoes remotely. One much discussed project that embodies both civilian and military geophysical applications is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HAARP. Although HAARP proponents claim it is nothing more than a simple civilian research station designed to investigate the properties of the upper atmosphere, few investigators buy that explanation. HAARP does have the appearance of a civilian project with open access and the work being done by civilian scientists. However, the project is managed by a joint U.S. Air Force and Navy committee and is funded out of the Department of Defense budget. Most recently, the heart of the program, the Ionospheric Research Instrument, IRI, was completed by one of the world's largest defense contractors working under the direction of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the Central Research and Development R&D organization for the DoD. DARPA manages and directs selected basic and applied R&D projects for the DoD, pursuing research and technology where risk and payoff are both very high and where success may provide dramatic advances for traditional military roles and missions. Under construction since 1990, the HARP IRI is a field of antennas on the ground in southeastern Alaska. The facility was probably completed late in 2005 with the announcement of same added to the DARPA website in March of 2006. It is now the world's largest radio frequency RF broadcaster with an effective radiated power of 3.6 million watts, over 72,000 times more powerful than the largest single AM radio station in the United States, 50,000 watts. The IRI uses a technique patented ability to focus the RF energy generated by the field, injecting it into a spot at the very top of the atmosphere in a region called the ionosphere. It heats the thin atmosphere of the ionosphere region by several thousand degrees. HARP then is a type of device called an ionospheric heater. This heating allows scientists to do a number of things with the ionosphere. Controlling and directing the processes and forces of the ionosphere is called ionospheric enhancement. An early HARP document stated, "The heart of the program is the development of a unique ionospheric heating capability to conduct the pioneering experiments required to adequately assess the potential for exploiting ionospheric enhancement technology for DoD purposes." What might those DoD purposes be? Something about winning wars? How might those purposes be achieved? What technologies will be needed to win the wars of the future? Researchers trying to answer those questions have come up with a vast number of possibilities, most bordering on science fiction. But then again, good science fiction is about recognizing the problems of the future and suggesting solutions to them before they happen. On March 1983, President Ronald Reagan called upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. This quest for the creation of a technology, of a weapon or weapons system that would make atomic war impossible was officially named the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. The press lost no time in dubbing it Star Wars after the George Lucas movie. That industrial academic complex on the greatest and costliest weapons hunt in human history. Thousands of ideas were floated, hundreds of those were funded. While SDI research has since been officially abandoned, some ideas are still being actively pursued to this day. Not all of these ongoing developmental programs are taking place in laboratories of the military and its contractors. Some of these ideas involve technologies or applications that, as violate international treaties, others the use of which would be repugnant to the ethical and moral values of the majority of Americans. In an effort to avoid public outcry and international condemnation, some of these programs have been disguised as maybe HARP. As Dr. Bernard Eastlund, the putative inventor of HARP, put it, "The boundary between science fiction and science comes with, can you actually make the thing you're proposing?" Bernard J. Eastlund is a physicist who received his BS in physics from MIT and his PhD in physics from Columbia University. He led a team of scientists and engineers working for Advanced Power Technologies, Inc., APTI, a wholly owned subsidiary of ARCO. Eastland's team developed the concept of a massive antenna array that could produce the kind of shield called for by President Reagan. That HARP is probably based on openly discuss manipulating the weather by moving the jet stream and using other techniques to create floods and droughts at will. These patents also describe a way to raise the ionosphere, sending it out into space as an electrically charged plasma capable of destroying anything electronic, like an incoming ICBM or spy satellite passing through it. HARP certainly looks like a ground-based Star Wars weapon system, a relic of the Cold War. But unlike most such relics, it is up and running and now fully funded. In August of 2002, the Russian State Duma, their version of Congress or Parliament, expressed concern about having a program to develop a qualitatively new type of weapon. A joint commission of the State Duma's International Affairs and Defense Committees issued a report that said, under the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HARP, the USA is creating new integral geophysical weapons that may influence the near-Earth medium with high-frequency radio waves. The significance of this qualitative leap could be compared to the transition from cold steel to firearms, or from conventional weapons to nuclear. This new type of weapon differs from previous types in that the near-Earth medium becomes at once an object of direct influence and its component. Further claim that the USA's plan to carry out large-scale scientific experiments under the HARP program and not controlled by the global community would create weapons capable of jamming radio communications, disrupting equipment installed on spaceships and rockets, provoke serious accidents in electricity networks and in oil and gas pipelines, and have a negative impact on the mental health of people populating entire regions. An appeal signed by 90 deputies demanding that an international ban be put on such large-scale geophysical experiments was sent to President Vladimir Putin, to the United Nations and other international organizations, to the parliaments and leaders of the UN member countries, to the scientific public, and to mass media outlets. HARP technology, real or imagined, has shook up a lot of people, setting off alarm signals with environmental, health, political, and sociological concerns in the minds of scientists, reporters, and concerned citizens all over the globe. We will take up to date on what is happening there now. Geophysical warfare. Those who fight wars have known since the beginning of the human race that weather affects the outcome of battle. Since the Vietnam War, the United States military has been actively trying to influence the outcome of conflicts by developing technologies that manipulate the weather. It is hardly surprising then that other nations such as the former Soviet Union, China, and even North Korea have been accused of doing the same. How far might the world's military have come in the decades since Vietnam? This is the 21st century. We are living in the future. If you are over 40, many things that were science fiction when you were in school are now everyday realities. An expanding field of scientific and commercial endeavor. But is it really possible to create floods or droughts, steer hurricanes or set off tsunamis, much less trigger earthquakes or volcanic eruptions? Are these still in the realm of science fiction, or have they become science fact? Throughout this book, we will examine evidence that intentional hostile control of the weather and other environmental processes, collectively called geophysical warfare, is a reality, just as Defense Secretary Cohen and the Russian State Duma said. In 1966, Dr. Gordon J.F. MacDonald wrote, "The key to geophysical warfare is the identification of environmental instabilities to which the addition of a small amount of energy would release vastly greater amounts of energy." This was in Geophysical Warfare, How to Wreck the Environment, a chapter he contributed to Nigel Calder's 1968 book, Unless Peace Comes, A Scientific Forecast of New Weapons. Dr. MacDonald was no off-the-deep-end loony. He was one of the United States' top internationally recognized scientists. At the time he penned those words, he was Associate Director of the Institute of Geophysics and Planetary Physics at the University of California, Los Angeles. A side note, the UCLA Plasma Physics Laboratory, PPL, has, over the last 20 years, operated another ionospheric heater near Fairbanks, Alaska, known as HIPAS, for high-power auroral stimulation, the success of which led to the creation of HAARP. Dr. MacDonald was also a member of the President's Science Advisory Committee and was later made a member of the President's Council on Environmental Quality. In Space, an article for Toward the Year 2018, released in 1968, Dr. MacDonald elaborated on the possibilities of geophysical warfare, writing, "By the year 2018, technology will make available to the leaders of the major nations a variety of techniques for conducting secret warfare, of which only a bare minimum of the security forces need to be appraised. One competitor covertly by bacteriological means, thoroughly weakening the population, though with a minimum of fatalities, before taking over with its own overt armed forces. Alternatively, techniques of weather modification could be employed to produce prolonged periods of drought or storm, thereby weakening a nation's capacity and forcing it to accept the demands of the competitor." In Between Two Ages, Brzezinski openly discussed conducting war covertly by causing droughts, storms, volcanic eruptions, and floods. If, as Dr. MacDonald wrote, only a few in the military or science place, how would the general public know if such a war were being fought? Were the dead and displaced of New Orleans victims of an invisible battle? Many people around the world are convinced that a covert weather war has for years, possibly decades, the evidence for which we will examine in this book. Dr. MacDonald, the MITRE Corporation, a not-for-profit, federally funded R&D company. It was MITRE who did the outrageously flawed environmental impact study for HAARP that, after carefully ignoring where the radio waves went after leaving the antenna array, concluded that there would be no impact on the environment. He was also a member of two organizations that have been accused of engaging in globalist conspiracies by anti-New World Order researchers, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, and the secretive Jason Group. The CFR, with such related organizations as the Trilateral Commission and the World Federalist Association, is a prominent supporter of globalization and of global governance schemes, as can be read in their own magazine, Foreign Affairs. The Jasons are described as a select group of world-class scientists who conduct studies for different parts of the U.S. government. The group is referred to as the Jason Defense Advisory Group, or simply the Jason Group. Today, their headquarters are located in the Jason Program Office at the MITRE Corporation. Jason was created as an elite division within the Institute for Defense Analysis, IDA. The official history of IDA says, IDA traces Secretary of Defense James Forrestal established the Weapons System Evaluation Group, WSEG, to provide technical analysis of weapon systems and programs. In the mid-1950s, the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff asked the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to form a civilian operate under the auspices of a university consortium to attract highly qualified scientists to assist WSEG in addressing the nation's most challenging security problems. Over the years, it has modified its structure to remain responsive to sponsor needs. In 1958, at the request of the Secretary of Defense, IDA established a division to support the newly created Advanced Research Projects Agency. The mandate of this division was broadened to include scientific and technical studies for all offices of the Director of Defense, Research and Engineering. Subsequent divisions were established to provide cost analysis, computer software and engineering, strategy and force assessments, and operational test and evaluation. Side note, the Office of the Director of Defense, Research and Engineering, DDR&E, was also involved in the early planning of HARP. Another major player in HARP is DARPA, formerly the Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA, who created the ARPANET, which actually grew into the Internet. ARPA was renamed DARPA on March 23, 1972, then back to ARPA on February 22, 1993, and then back to DARPA again on March 11, 1996. Dr. McDonald published numerous papers and articles on future weapons technology. These suggested such coming advances as manipulation or control over the weather and climate, including destructive use of ocean waves and melting or destabilizing of the polar ice caps, intentional ozone depletion, triggering earthquakes, and control of the human brain by utilizing the Earth's energy fields. Today, the polar ice caps are indeed melting and holes in the ozone layer are growing. Could these be the handiwork of advanced weapons? What about earthquakes and mind control? Are we, the private citizens of the world, in the crosshairs of bizarre, unthinkable weapons? What about the Russian Duma's claim that HARP could have a negative impact on the mental health of people populating entire regions of the globe? In the Sky, their seminal article on HARP in Nexus magazine, Dr. Nick Begich and Jean Manning describe how HARP could be used to induce mental dysfunction, quoting from Brzezinski on a proposal from Dr. McDonald, saying, "Political strategists are tempted to exploit research on the brain and human behavior. Geophysicist Gordon J.F. MacDonald, specialist in problems of warfare, says, an accurately timed, artificially excited electronic stroke could lead to a pattern of oscillations that produce relatively high power of the Earth. In this way, one could develop a system that would seriously impair the brain performance of very large populations in selected regions over an extended period." In 1969, Dr. MacDonald wrote, "Our understanding of basic environmental science and technology is primitive, but still more primitive are our notions of the proper political forms and procedures to deal with the consequences of modification. It would appear that the gap between our understanding of environmental science and technology and our ability to grapple with this knowledge as a body politic has changed little in the intervening decades. This book, like so many others since Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, is an attempt to correct this problem of science creating ever more and bigger monsters to come out of science's Pandora's box by alerting you to the need to find a solution. It is not sufficient merely that I or anyone write. It requires you, the reader, the citizen, to take action, to create the necessary forms and procedures to deal with the consequences of modification." Chemtrails. This question of whether advanced technology is being intentionally used to alter the climate is also seen in the contrail versus chemtrail debate, which we will address in depth. If you have spent much time looking up lately, you may have noticed that something about the sky seems to have changed. You may be old enough to remember when the contrails from jet aircraft used weeks behind the planes, blazing like comets, disappearing in seconds. Now they persist for hours. The brilliant blue sky of the morning becomes milky white opalescence in late afternoon as the contrails merge together, creating a layer of artificial cirrus clouds. What's going on? Are we being sprayed? Some chemical in these persistent contrails making them chemtrails? Who could be doing this and why? Trails via the internet, you will find many sites devoted to this subject, both pro and con. Some will tell you there is no spraying, that these strangely persistent contrails are in fact perfectly natural. Others will detail bizarre things found in the air. Chemicals and metals like aluminum and barium salts, and stranger things like E. coli bacteria and genetically modified human blood are but a few of the bizarre things claimed to have been spewed out after commercial aircraft or mysterious unmarked tankers have unloaded their covert payloads over the heads of frightened or angry witnesses. Particulate matter in the air is called an aerosol. If you search the scientific media for information on aerosols, you will discover that there are literally scores of organizations, military, academic, commercial, environmental, and governmental, involved in studying, monitoring, tracking, and placing aerosols in the atmosphere. A number of technologies using aerosols for a variety of purposes have been patented, and many more are under development. Chemtrails, it seems, are not a one-size-fits-all phenomena. There is not just one program running or just one purpose to this alleged spraying. I have found that there are many players, many technologies for many purposes, injecting an amazing variety of aerosols into our environment. In the chemtrails section of this book, I will try to lay out for you what is real and what is probably lies and hysteria. Like in the UFO field, military intelligence may well have injected wild and crazy stories into the chemtrail debate to hide covert operations. Unfortunately, the scientifically challenged have added a tone of very literal hysteria to all this. It is probable that not all contrails are chemtrails, and possible that not all chemtrails are intentionally evil, but all are an environmental hazard that will have to be addressed. Aerosols are a very real problem, somewhat acknowledged in the scientific press and totally ignored by the popular media. After the week of no commercial flights over the United States in the wake of horrific events of September 11, 2001, atmospheric scientists were able to make new measurements of an unmodified sky. They found that these clouds produced by persistent contrails, or chemtrails if you will, did in fact reflect back into space solar energy during daylight hours and trap in heat at night, adding about a half a degree Fahrenheit to the average temperature of North America. In the contrail-chemtrail debate, we see a bridge between the topics of hostile military use of environmental modification, NMOD, and the unintentional. It is now a fact recognized by the scientific community that the banks of artificial cirrus clouds left behind by the thousands of aircraft that ply our skies daily are taking a toll on the environment. Officially, this comes under the heading of inadvertent environmental modification and is a part of the global warming debate. To date, the most commonly talked about aspect of inadvertent environmental modification has been the destruction of the rainforest. But in just the last few years, contrails and the global dimming they seem to be causing is being pushed to center stage in scientific circles. But what if contrails are actually chemtrails? What if these strangely persistent contrails are actually the product of some nefarious covert spraying operations? We will look at several possible answers, including the possibilities of misguided civilian programs as well as military operations. Environmental modification. Examples of both hostile military and inadvertent modifications of the environment can be seen back to the dawn of civilization. Sumeria is the oldest civilization recognized by Western science. The city-state of Sumeria existed between the Tigris and Euphrates River in an area called the Fertile Crescent in what is now Iraq between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago. Today that land is a vast region of deserts caused by overfarming and overgrazing. Desertification is an example of inadvertent environmental modification, a process that is ongoing in several parts of the world today. The United States got a taste of it in the Dust Bowl years of the Great Depression. Scientists are warning us that it could happen there again. Examples of hostile environmental modification, ENMOD, can be seen in the salting of the fields of Carthage by Rome. After a long hours, Rome won, and intent on never having to deal with Carthage again, sowed salt into the croplands of Carthage, sterilizing the earth and forcing the people to move away, abandoning their cities so as not to starve. Several examples from American history can be cited. During the 30s, the United States government fought a series of wars against the indigenous people of North America. These were called the Indian Wars. The first people, Indians of the Great Plains, had an economy and a way of life based on the buffalo. The U.S. government realized that if the buffalo were gone, the Indian would be destroyed. Thousands of buffalo hunters were hired and sent to slaughter the buffaloes in the millions. The buffalo was nearly driven to extinction, and the Indian was brought to his knees. 100 years later, America's military pursued a similar course in Southeast Asia when fighting the Vietnam War. There, a two-pronged attack was launched on the environment. In an echo of the tactics used against the Indians, military planners realized that the jungle was home to the enemy. Millions of gallons of defoliants, Agent Orange, Agent White, and others were poured over the jungles of Southeast Asia. This was not merely to clear paths and roads and landing fields, but was actually intended to the jungle itself and the shelter and sustenance it provided to the enemy. Simultaneously, an effort was made to make the weather a weapon. Under Operation Popeye, cloud seeding was conducted over the Viet Cong's resupply routes, collectively calling the Ho Chi Minh Trail in hopes of inducing drenching rains turned these dirt tracks into impassable quagmires of mud. While the ENMOD was a heartbreaking success, the tactics used during the Vietnam War proved to be as unsuccessful and destructive as the war itself. The horror and folly of military ENMOD led to the creation and passage of the United Nations-sponsored treaty named the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or Any Other Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques, widely the ENMOD Convention, or simply ENMOD for short. It attempts to prohibit using the environment as a weapon in conflicts between nations. After being co-sponsored by the United States and the Soviet Union, it was formally adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on December 10, 1976, and officially signature on May 18, 1977. ENMOD entered the House. The 20th State Party deposited its instrument of ratification on October 5, 1978. To date, the ENMOD Convention has only been ratified by 70 of the 193 countries recognized by the United Nations. Even worse, NMOD is unenforceable in any practical sense. We will examine this in depth also. Meanwhile, the U.S. military has not lost interest in environmental modification, even if it is forbidden by the UN. The Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, General Ronald R. Fogelman, tasked the Air University at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, to look 30 years into the future to identify the concepts, capabilities, and technologies the United States will require to remain the dominant air and space force in the 21st century. The Air University commander led a team of students and faculty from the Air University's Air War College and Air Command and Staff College, scientists and technologists at the Air Force Institute of Technology, located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Air Force Academy, and AFROTC cadets from around the country, and selected academic and business leaders in the civilian community across the nation in the 10-month effort to meet General Fogelman's tasking. The resulting study is called Air Force 2025, or 2025 for short. The team's findings were briefed to General Fogelman in June 1996 and to the Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Sheila Widnall, in July 1996. The 2025 study was subsequently published in a collection of white papers consisting of an executive summary and 41 individual papers totaling more than 3,300 pages of text. One of those white papers was Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. In it, we see what some military planners are thinking for future environmental modification applications. As we will examine in detail later, that paper began with, in 2025, U.S. aerospace forces can own the weather by capitalizing on emerging technologies and focusing development of those technologies to warfighting applications. Such a capability offers the warfighter tools to shape the battle space in ways never before possible. It provides opportunities to impact operations across the full spectrum of conflict and is The purpose of this paper is to outline a strategy for the use of future weather modification system to achieve military objectives. While the 2025 study is not official U.S. policy, it was drafted with the intent that it would provide a platform to build policy and weapon systems on. In this book, we will look at several technologies under development and the policies and agendas those technologies could be used to further. Before we look at the ways the world's militaries are seeking to own the weather today, let us step back and take a look at the development of this technology from the beginning of the modern scientific age.